Earning your degree online doesn't mean you have to go about it alone. At Capella University, we're here to support you when you're ready. From enrollment counselors who get to know you and your goals, to academic coaches who can help you form a plan to stay on track. We care about your success and are dedicated to helping you pursue your goals. Going back to school is a big step, but having support at every step of your academic journey can make a big difference. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. According to Healthline, mass hysteria is defined as, quote, an outbreak of unusual and uncharacteristic behaviors, thoughts and feelings, or health symptoms shared among a group of people, end quote. The signs and symptoms of a mass hysteria are as follows. 1. People typically don't believe something specific has triggered their symptoms. 2. People don't have an underlying health condition that could prompt those symptoms. 3. People wouldn't behave in that way on a regular basis. And 4. People may share an extreme fear of an exaggerated or non-existent threat. Perhaps the most famous mass hysteria in the United States took place between February 1692 and May 1693, the Salem witch trials. The late 17th century was a scary time in colonial America, as accusations of witchcraft led to the deaths of at least 25 people, 19 by hanging, 1 by torture, and at least 5 died in jail. We will cover the Salem witch trials in an upcoming episode of the Red Treehouse. But did you know, one of the most famous mass hysterias that seems to have been forgotten, despite it occurring only 70 years ago, took place in Glasgow, Scotland. Over the course of 3 days in September 1954, hundreds of school-aged children acted against what they believed was a 7-foot-tall vampire with iron teeth, a creature known as the Gorbals Vampire. The story is both fascinating and distressing. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the disturbing case of the Gorbals Vampire. What caused hundreds of children to take up arms against the supposedly supernatural and undead enemy. I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. A small area in the city of Glasgow, Scotland, Gorbals sits along the south bank of the River Clyde. Though recent census data shows a population of just over 8,000, in the 1930s and continuing until the 1950s, the population in the Gorbals district reached a staggering 90,000 people, and it was considered one of the poorest neighborhoods in all of Scotland. A BBC article dated February 22, 2024, stated, quote, Glasgow in the late 1940s was a place of slum housing, overcrowding, and disease. The post-war city struggled to pick itself up, and the Gorbals area soon became one of Europe's worst slums. At the time, about 40,000 people lived in tenement housing, where conditions were appalling. End quote. Many who lived in the Gorbals area were laborers who needed affordable housing, and tenement housing was constructed quickly and cheaply. In most cases, as many as 40 individuals shared one toilet and one sink, and it was not uncommon to see, quote, sewage and contaminated water filling the streets, end quote. The crowded conditions made life difficult and dangerous for the residents of the Gorbals area. Photos of the Gorbals during the time following World War II capture a bleak picture in what at the time was one of Europe's most deprived neighborhoods. In the south-central portion of the Gorbals sits a massive grassy area that covers over 7 acres. At the front sits a beautiful and weathered stone gatehouse, leading into what is known locally as the City of the Dead. Built in 1840 to, quote, provide an affordable and respectable place of burial for the people of Gorbals and the surrounding areas of the city of Glasgow, end quote. The Southern Necropolis is the final resting place of over 250,000 individuals. And for 3 days, in September 1954, it was believed to be haunted by the Gorbals Vampire, a 7-foot-tall vampire with iron teeth. A vampire who'd already kidnapped and killed 2 local children and was a threat to attack even more. The story of the Gorbals Vampire spread like wildfire, and children all over the area tuned in with wide-eyed stares and horrified faces as they learned of the creature's appearance. It was claimed the Gorbals Vampire was incredibly tall, had pale skin, iron teeth, and red eyes that glowed in the dark. The creature was scary enough, but adding to the terror was its dwelling place, the Southern Necropolis, known locally as the Gravy. As the news of the vampire passed from child to child, a startling revelation came to light. 2 local children were missing and were rumored to have been eaten by the Gorbals Vampire. In a short time, children all over the Gorbals were discussing the vampire. In school, on the playground, amongst themselves. And no doubt, as the word spread, Glasgow's children grew fearful that they could be next. It's reasonable to think these fearful children, having heard about the death of two of their peers, would go into hiding. After all, common sense says young children are no match for a formidable 7-foot-tall vampire with glowing red eyes and iron teeth. But the children of the Gorbals had nerves of steel. Remember, they grew up in harsh, overcrowded conditions in one of the toughest, poorest areas in Scotland. They were accustomed to fighting for survival, and they weren't about to let the Gorbals Vampire snuff them out. For the children of the Gorbals, quote, survival meant facing your deadliest fears, end quote. Inevitably, rumors of the vampire's existence turned into rumored sightings of the creature. Children claimed to have seen it, or claimed to know someone who did. What started as an urban legend quickly turned into a real-life threat. And rather than sit back and let the vampire come to them, the children drew up a plan to go after the vampire. At 3 p.m. on September 23, 1954, the school bell rang to dismiss the children of the Gorbals from school. Almost in unison, over 400 children ran out of the school building. They were headed to the Southern Necropolis. They were united in their purpose to capture and kill the Gorbals Vampire. And they were armed with makeshift weapons, stones, sharp sticks, knives, and even household pets. Like an army, they were determined to kill their enemy and regain control of their territory. The Spooky Scotland website included interviews with 3 children who participated in the hunt for the Gorbals Vampire. The first interview was with Ronnie Sanderson, who was 8 years old at the time. Quote, it all started in the playground. The word was there was a vampire, and everyone was going to head out there after school. At 3 o'clock, the school emptied, and everyone made a beeline for it. We sat there for ages on the wall, waiting and waiting. I wouldn't go in because it was a bit scary for me. I think somebody saw someone wandering around, and the cry went up, "There's the vampire." That was it. That was the word to get off that wall quick and get away from it. I just remember scampering home to my mother. "What's the matter with you?" "I've seen a vampire." And I got a clout round the ear for my trouble. I didn't really know what a vampire was. End quote. The second interview was with Kenny Hughes. Quote, we were told, or we picked up in school, that it was somebody called the man with the iron teeth. We started to scream. Who's this man with the iron teeth? And he apparently had big fangs that come down like a walrus or something. The children's terror built up and built up until it basically became mass hysteria. End quote. The third and final interview was with Tam Smith. Quote, the red light and the smoke from the Dixon Blazes Steelworks would flare up and make all the gravestones leap. You could see figures walking about at the back, all lined in red light. End quote. As time passed, tensions grew, and eventually grew into a full-blown hysteria. Children began running in all directions, screaming, and attempting to lure the vampire out of hiding. It was an impressive show of force, and they were determined to strike at the vampire if it appeared. But no matter how hard they looked, they could not find him. As the hysteria heightened, someone called the police, who were dispatched to the Southern Necropolis. When the constable arrived, he was shocked at what he saw. Hundreds of children, as young as 4, and onward into the teens, and including some adults, were moving frenetically between the gravestones, searching for the Gorbals Vampire. They were armed, some with crosses and crucifixes. The Spooky Scotland website included an interview with the constable. Quote, "When I appeared, I felt like the Pied Piper of Hamlet. All shapes and sizes of children streamed after me, all talking at once, and telling me of the vampire with iron teeth. This I could handle, but when grown-ups approached me and asked earnestly, 'Is there anything in this vampire story?' it made me think." End quote. Despite the growing police presence in the Southern Necropolis, there were simply too many children. They ignored police instructions to clear the area, and were hell-bent on capturing and killing the Gorbals Vampire. After a time, police called upon the headmaster of St. Bonaventure's primary school, Edward Cusick, hoping he could calm the storm. After his arrival, the children gathered around him, and he told them the Gorbals Vampire was a legend and not a true story. This seemed to connect with the children, and after it began raining a short time later, they all went home. It seemed the hunt for the Gorbals Vampire had finally ended. Except, for the next 2 nights, small groups of children continued to roam the Southern Necropolis, hoping to catch the elusive Gorbals Vampire. Then, just as quickly as the hysteria started, it ended. Something interesting. The incident that sparked the hysteria, the disappearance and murder of 2 local children, likely didn't happen at all. It seems the rumor of the disappearances spread amongst the children, but no one, including adults and the police, knew of 2 children who were missing or murdered. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, many asked the question, what caused this? While the children of the Gorbals certainly believed the vampire was real, it is possible they were influenced by a combination of local lore, the Bible, and American comic books. Parents sometimes warned their rebellious and misbehaving children of the Iron Man, an ogre, and type of Scottish boogeyman. Another was Jenny with the iron teeth, a quote, hideous witch said to have prowled around Glasgow Green in the early 1800s. Jenny was infamous for devouring children who refused to sleep. End quote. It is possible some characteristics of the Gorbals Vampire came from the Bible, specifically the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, the prophet states, quote, "After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, and trample down the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. End quote. Did this verse influence, even inadvertently, the children of the Gorbals? Perhaps the strongest influence came from an unlikely source, the United States. At the time, an American comic book called The Vampire with the Iron Teeth was making the rounds, and it's possible some of the children in the Gorbals came across it. The story of the hunt in the Southern Necropolis made national news, looking for someone or something to blame. The press blamed American horror comics, such as Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror, for influencing the minds of the children in the Gorbals. And they demanded that something be done to prevent this from happening again. In 1955, something was done. One article reported, quote, "With the media baying for blood, a strange coalition formed between the teachers' union, some Christian groups, and the Communist Party, who wanted to stop American influence from spreading into the United Kingdom. Consequently, they put pressure on the government to debate the issue in Parliament. As a result, the Gorbals MP, Alice Cullen, spearheaded a new act to protect children from harmful publications. The Children and Young Persons Harmful Publications Act became law in 1955 and is still in existence today." End quote. The story of the Gorbals Vampire really fascinates me. It's a unique mix of strange, creepy, and almost unbelievable. And while it's a near certainty that hundreds of children work themselves into a mass hysteria, it's unsettling that it spread so quickly and under the radar of adults. It's a small miracle that no one was seriously hurt, or far worse. I believe folklore and legends can have a profound impact on a person's experience of fear. It can dominate one's thoughts, keep them awake at night, and at least in the case of the Gorbals Vampire, lead to mass hysteria. I suppose on a smaller scale, we experience something similar when we watch a horror movie and weeks later are still running up the stairs after we turn off the lights. We know intuitively that nothing is going to get us, but emotionally, it feels like we're under threat of attack. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. What caused hundreds of children to take up arms against a supposedly supernatural and undead enemy? Were American comic books, local lore, the Bible, or just kids being kids to blame? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.